A night between falling asleep and dawn, roughly a third of adults past 50 will be jolted awake by an identical, painful intrusion. It is not an external noise or a vivid nightmare, but rather an internal spasm. The calf muscle suddenly contracts, locking up completely until soft tissue feels like a hard lump of stone inside your lower leg. Even before you consciously process the event, you find yourself upright on a chilly floor. With one hand balancing against the wall and the other gripping your leg, you simply wait for the agony to pass. This issue peaks during a person's 60s and affects over half of the population past age 80. For some individuals, it represents a monthly inconvenience, while others endure it multiple times a week or even nightly. Data indicates that 40% of sufferers experience these episodes 3 or more times every single week. The crucial realization for this entire topic hinges on the fact that most people react by choosing the incorrect remedy. You will likely attribute it to dehydration, a lack of dietary potassium, or promise yourself to purchase a magnesium supplement the following day. Yet, even when you execute every preventative measure flawlessly, the spasm inevitably returns. A brief distinction must be made before addressing the main solution. If you consistently experience heavy, swollen lower legs, puffy ankles, or a dull ache that differs from a sharp contraction, you are dealing with an entirely separate physiological issue. That particular condition requires a circulatory drainage approach, which is detailed in a separate resource. For our current purposes, the focus remains solely on the acute spasm and a specific 30-second physical adjustment capable of halting it mid-episode. Let us review the exact sequence of the event, as anyone who has lived through it recognizes the reality far better than a medical textbook description. You are resting quietly in bed, perhaps after a slight movement, or maybe without moving at all, when the tissue violently tightens. This is no mere twinge. It behaves like a mechanical clamp constricting your limb. Pressing your fingers into the area reveals a knot as rigid as a piece of timber. The discomfort possesses an intense, almost electrical severity that is entirely unaffected by your fluid intake during dinner. After limping, stretching, and waiting, the tension eventually subsides, allowing you to return to bed with a bruised sensation and a deep dread of a recurrence. The uncounted toll of this condition is the profound disruption to your sleep cycle. You are left completely alert, with an elevated heart rate and a throbbing leg, while the mattress loses its warmth. Many individuals lie perfectly still out of fear that any movement might trigger another episode, while others alter their sleeping posture or begin to dread bedtime entirely. Although the physical contraction might only last 2 minutes, the disruption can sabotage your rest until morning. Experiencing this repeatedly over several months inflicts a level of exhaustion that the word contraction fails to fully convey. This is a significant health concern that deserves serious attention. If you assume you are facing this alone, statistics show it is slightly more prevalent in women and heavily targets individuals who spend most of their day seated. Remaining sedentary does not mean you are at fault. It simply creates the precise environment where a lower leg muscle is primed to lock up. Because a zero-cost, 30-second physical adjustment does not generate commercial profit, it rarely receives public attention, which is why we must analyze it thoroughly here.
Most people bring a specific misconception into that early morning crisis. Conventional wisdom suggests that a spasm indicates a dehydrated muscle or a mineral deficiency, specifically low water, potassium, or magnesium. The prevailing advice is to replenish these elements to make the tissue relax. Consequently, people consume excessive fluids before bed, increase their banana consumption, or keep tonic water nearby because of traditional family advice. While an occasional coincidence keeps this belief alive, the contraction will still strike on nights when you are fully hydrated after a nutrient-rich meal, causing that conventional theory to fall apart. The traditional explanation fails because it targets the incorrect anatomical system. A nocturnal leg spasm is not a nutritional shortage, it is an electrical malfunction. The command to contract does not originate within the muscle tissue itself, but rather within the nervous system. Specifically, a motor neuron located in the spinal cord sends an involuntary signal down the nerve pathway, forcing the muscle to tighten. During a nighttime episode, this neuron experiences what researchers call a persistent inward current, meaning the electrical switch becomes physically jammed in the active position. Once the neuron fires and the tissue locks, a dangerous feedback loop is established. The compacted muscle sends an urgent sensory signal back up to the spine, which further excites the malfunctioning neuron. This causes the nerve to fire with greater intensity, forcing the muscle to constrict even tighter, which amplifies the signal returning to the spine. This self-sustaining loop will not stop on its own. While the human body will eventually interrupt the cycle naturally, that period represents the longest 2 minutes of your night, whereas the manual adjustment we will cover cuts the circuit immediately. To understand the solution, replace the idea of a dehydrated muscle with a mechanical analogy. Imagine a vehicle alarm triggering loudly on a quiet street at 3 in the morning. Whatever disturbed the vehicle, whether a gust of wind or a passing truck, is already gone, but the alarm continues because the electrical circuit is latched. It will continue to blare into the darkness until an external action forces a system reset. Yelling at the vehicle or waiting for the battery to drain does nothing to fix the jammed component, which is exactly how a nocturnal spasm behaves. The original physical trigger, whether a slight toe movement under the sheets or a long day of standing, has already passed. What remains is a latched neural circuit locked in a high-voltage state. Now consider how typical remedies fail to address this mechanical reality. Drinking a glass of water during an active spasm is the equivalent of spraying the outside of that alarming car with a garden hose. You can drench the vehicle until dawn, but the water will never reach the internal wiring responsible for the noise. Attempting to eat a banana at 3 a.m. is equally ineffective because it targets the structural tissue rather than the electrical control system. Once you recognize that the issue lies within the neurological wiring rather than basic nutrition, the correct intervention becomes completely logical. If your past medical appointments never provided this level of physiological detail, consider subscribing as we break down one biological mechanism at a time every week. Before explaining the physical reset, we must establish a critical safety boundary to protect your health. A standard muscle contraction tightens intensely and then completely releases its grip. It inflicts severe discomfort for a duration ranging from a few seconds to several minutes, then subsides, leaving behind a tender muscle. A deep vein blood clot behaves in a fundamentally different manner. Remember this rule. If a single calf becomes visibly swollen, warm to the touch, red or discolored, and remains persistently tender, you are not dealing with a simple cramp. These symptoms point to a potential blood clot, which requires immediate medical emergency evaluation rather than a physical stretch. Do not delay seeking care or try to convince yourself the symptom is minor. There are additional warning signs that require a formal clinical evaluation rather than an online video. If your spasms are accompanied by visible muscle wasting or localized weakness that develops over several weeks, seek medical attention. The same applies if you experience spreading numbness or a creeping tingling sensation down the limb. Furthermore, a deep ache that arises during walking and vanishes immediately upon resting suggests arterial narrowing, which requires professional diagnostic mapping. Finally, if these painful episodes are completely unprecedented, sudden, and constant, you should be evaluated as certain medications, renal function changes, or thyroid imbalances can trigger them. While the vast majority of nocturnal leg spasms are entirely benign, exceptions exist, and you must know how to identify them. With that safety boundary clearly defined, we can look closer at the neurological wiring. Understanding this mechanism transforms the 30-second physical movement from a temporary trick into a completely logical medical countermeasure. First, we must separate two distinct phenomena that are frequently conflated. There is an exercise-induced cramp that occurs during intense physical exertion when a fatigued muscle gives out, and there is the nocturnal rest spasm that targets older individuals in bed out of nowhere. Although they feel identical, the nighttime variant possesses a completely different physiological cause and requires a unique solution. If you have been told to simply hydrate with sports drinks or train harder, realize that advice was intended for athletes, not for your specific situation. To answer why these episodes accelerate with age, we have to look past the generic concept of getting older. The specific neurological change involves a gradual loss of motor neurons within the spinal cord over decades, a decline that occurs faster in the lower limbs than the upper body. The surviving nerve cells are forced to adopt more muscle fibers, making them inherently more unstable and prone to spontaneous electrical firing. Concurrently, human tendons naturally lose elasticity and shorten, particularly the Achilles tendon in individuals who sit frequently. A shortened tendon combined with a tight muscle group lives permanently closer to its electrical threshold for contracting. By age 68, a leg that never gave you trouble at 40 sits fully primed like a mechanical trap with a highly sensitive trigger. Everyday lifestyle factors then cause that trap to snap shut. A day spent entirely without movement is one of the strongest statistical correlations to nighttime spasms, meaning prolonged sitting leaves the nervous system unstable. Conversely, excessive physical overexertion that exhausts the muscle tissue can cause the exact same vulnerability. Your sleeping posture also introduces a hidden risk factor that is rarely discussed. When lying flat on your back, the weight of heavy bedding presses the feet downward, keeping the calf muscle bunched and shortened for hours. Maintaining any skeletal muscle in its shortest position for a prolonged period acts as a direct neurological invitation for a spasm. This explains why the event occurs at 3 a.m. rather than during your afternoon routine. During the day, constant small movements and weight shifts keep the communication between nerve and muscle active and stable. When you remain motionless for hours, that neural traffic falls silent, creating an environment where a quiet nervous system becomes unstable. Your foot drifts downward, the calf settles into its shortest possible length, and the central nervous system enters a less vigilant state during deep sleep. The same leg that remained perfectly stable all day takes advantage of the quietest hours to experience an electrical misfire. This is not a matter of bad luck. It is the predictable result of multiple physical conditions aligning simultaneously.
Now that we understand the active trap, we can look at the built-in off switch that your body already contains. Deep within the musculoskeletal system sits a specialized tension sensor known as the Golgi tendon organ, located precisely where the calf muscle transitions into the Achilles tendon. Its primary function is to monitor physical tension and mechanical strain. When it detects that the tendon is being stretched under a significant load, it transmits an immediate inhibitory signal directly back to the overexcited neuron in the spinal cord, commanding it to stop firing. This mechanism serves as a literal manual reset for the latched neural circuit. The breakthrough for your sleep quality is that you can activate this sensory switch on purpose. By performing a targeted manual stretch on the contracting muscle, you load the tendon, trigger the sensor, and forcefully override the malfunctioning neurological loop. This explains why the physical adjustment resolves the issue within 30 seconds. You are bypassing the muscle entirely to manipulate the nerve. This electrical reality is precisely why standard nutritional options consistently fail clinical trials. A comprehensive Cochrane review, which synthesizes data from multiple clinical trials, determined that magnesium supplements failed to provide meaningful relief for older adults suffering from typical nighttime spasms. Potassium adjustments are equally ineffective unless a formal blood panel confirms a genuine systemic deficiency. Furthermore, quinine, the bitter ingredient in tonic water, has been heavily restricted by federal regulators for treating cramps due to dangerous hematological and cardiovascular risks that far outweigh any minor therapeutic benefit. None of this analysis constitutes individual medical advice, and any supplement changes should be discussed with your physician. It is also worth noting that several common medications are statistically linked to an increase in nocturnal spasms. These include standard diuretics, cholesterol-lowering statins, and most notably, long-acting inhaled bronchodilators used for managing asthma or COPD. A large-scale study published in JAMA Internal Medicine indicated that these inhalers correlate with a 2.5 times higher risk of experiencing leg cramps. Do not alter or discontinue any prescribed medication based on this information, as stopping a necessary prescription presents far greater health risks than a muscle spasm. Simply bring this data to your doctor to evaluate together. We must also clarify another common confusion that misdirects people for years. Restless legs syndrome and acute nocturnal spasms are entirely different conditions requiring different solutions. Restless leg syndrome presents as a creeping, uncomfortable internal urge to move the limbs, where voluntary movement provides immediate sensory relief. A nighttime cramp is a rigid, painful, involuntary physical contraction that can be felt as a hard knot with your bare hand. If your primary symptom is that restless internal urge, mechanical stretching will not resolve the underlying issue, and accurate clinical naming is required to get the correct treatment.
To apply this knowledge directly to your own body, you can perform a few physical checks tonight without any special equipment. First, perform a sleep posture assessment by noticing the exact angle of your feet before you drift off under the blankets. If your toes point downward away from your shins, your lower leg tissue is being held in a shortened state for hours, priming the nerve. This simple observation costs nothing to identify and can be corrected mechanically. Second, perform a localized tightness check by standing roughly one arm's length away from a solid wall. Extend one leg straight back, press that rear heel firmly into the floor, and lean your torso forward toward the wall to feel the tension along the back of your leg. Compare the flexibility of both sides. If one limb is noticeably tighter or the heel struggles to remain grounded, that specific muscle group is chronically shortened. This localized restriction is highly correctable through consistent positioning. Third, the next time an acute spasm occurs, apply the manual stretch detailed below and track the time it takes to resolve. If manually flexing your foot toward your shin halts the intense discomfort within roughly 30 seconds, you have verified that the event is a neurological reflex rather than a chemical deficit. This physical intervention will outperform dietary options consistently. Fourth, maintain a brief log for 1 week to identify whether your episodes follow days of prolonged sitting or periods of unusual physical fatigue. You are not attempting to self-diagnose, but rather identifying your personal patterns, which are far more valuable than general advice. Finally, pinpoint the exact location of the physical contraction when it occurs. While it typically targets the main body of the calf, it can manifest within the arch of the foot, causing the toes to curl downward, or occasionally within the hamstring group. Whichever muscle group locks up is the exact tissue you must manually elongate. Knowing your specific target area ahead of time prevents confusion and panic during an early morning episode. Let us quickly dismiss common dietary myths that continue to disrupt people's sleep cycles. The belief that dietary potassium is the primary solution for typical nighttime spasms is incorrect. While potassium matters for overall cellular health, an acute contraction will not be resolved by eating a banana at 3 a.m. Treat bananas as breakfast nutrition rather than an emergency remedy. Similarly, the minimal amount of quinine found in modern tonic water is insufficient to alter neural firing, and regular consumption carries unnecessary health risks. Relying on magnesium pills often provides a false sense of action, yet clinical evidence demonstrates minimal efficacy for this specific type of nocturnal cramp. Conversely, the traditional habit of walking off a cramp contains some validity, as gentle movement helps settle the tissue after it has released. However, attempting to force a fully locked limb to bear weight on a dark floor introduces a severe risk of falling. You must break the electrical circuit using the manual stretch first, and only then proceed to walk. Nutrition provides general systemic support through balanced minerals and steady hydration throughout the day, rather than a large volume of water right before bed that merely interrupts your rest for a bathroom visit. The primary tool is mechanical movement that directly targets the nervous system. Here is the exact operational sequence for stopping an active spasm and the preventative routine to keep it from returning. The moment a contraction strikes in the middle of the night, your single objective is to load the Achilles tendon. If you choose to remain in bed, straighten the affected leg fully, flex your ankle sharply, and pull your toes upward toward your shin as far as possible. If necessary, use your hand to pull the front of your foot backward, or loop a towel or bedsheet around the ball of the foot to maximize the leverage while keeping the knee locked straight. If you prefer to stand, step the cramping leg backward, press the heel flat against the floor, and lean your weight forward into a wall or heavy piece of furniture. Both approaches share an identical mechanical goal: stretching the calf muscle to load the tendon sensor. Hold this position steadily without bouncing while breathing slowly. Within 10 to 30 seconds, you will feel the intense contractions suddenly release as the internal tension sensor forces the nerve to reset. If physical limitations like a stiff back prevent you from reaching your foot, the towel or bedsheet method provides the necessary extension. If the spasm targets the arch of the foot rather than the calf, press your toes flat against the floor or pull them upward manually. If the circuit fails to clear after the initial stretch, release the tension for one deep breath and then apply the steady load a second time. Avoid sudden, violent jerking motions, as the internal neurological sensor responds only to firm, continuous pressure. Once the spasm releases, do not immediately return to sleep. Instead, take a few deliberate steps, preferably walking on your heels, or perform one more gentle stretch to let the tissue calm down. Applying localized warmth, such as a heating pad on a low setting or a warm cloth, helps soothe the residual soreness. This addresses the immediate nighttime emergency. Preventing future occurrences requires a separate approach focused on conditioning the entire neuromuscular loop and modifying your sleep environment.
Before going to sleep, perform a focused calf stretch against the wall, holding for 30 seconds with a straight leg, followed by a second round with the rear knee slightly bent to target the deeper soleus muscle tissue. If you can do so comfortably, include a gentle hamstring stretch as well. Clinical research indicates that stretching these specific leg groups prior to bedtime correlates with a reduction in the frequency of nighttime cramps. While the statistical evidence is varied rather than definitive, the practice is completely safe, costs nothing, and stabilizes the nervous system for many individuals. During the day, perform slow heel raises to rebuild tissue resilience and restore tendon length that naturally diminishes over time. Rise up onto the balls of your feet, pause briefly at the peak, and lower your weight under complete control for 2 easy sets while stabilizing yourself against a counter. This conditioning keeps the muscle group further away from its neurological trigger threshold. Next, modify your sleeping setup to prevent your feet from being held in a downward position all night. Loosen the bedding at the foot of the mattress so your toes are not forced flat, or place a small pillow to maintain your feet in a neutral position if you sleep on your back. This simple adjustment prevents the calf from remaining compacted for 8 hours. Throughout the day, break up long periods of sitting by standing and walking briefly to maintain proper circulation. Given the high statistical link between a sedentary lifestyle and nighttime cramps, moving regularly is one of the most effective habits you can adopt. Be patient with this routine, as conditioning takes time to manifest. During the first week, your primary success will be halting active spasms quickly using the manual stretch, which immediately reduces the anxiety associated with bedtime. Over the following weeks, as the pre-sleep stretches and loose bedding take effect, most people experience a noticeable drop in both the frequency and intensity of the episodes. By the end of a month, consistent application typically yields long periods of uninterrupted sleep. Subscribe before leaving, as these physiological mechanisms are interconnected, and our subsequent material builds directly upon these principles. To ensure you remember this while half asleep, here is the entire process summarized into 5 clear actions. Immediate reset. Pull your toes sharply toward your shin with a straight knee the instant a spasm strikes, holding until it completely releases. Post-event care. Walk gently on your heels and apply localized heat to soothe the muscle. Bedtime routine. Complete a deliberate 30-second calf stretch on each leg before getting into bed. Bedding. Adjustment. Loosen your sheets to ensure your feet are not pinned downward during the night. Daytime activity. Avoid prolonged sitting by moving your legs frequently throughout the day, and this approach combines one immediate countermeasure for an active crisis with 4 basic habits designed to stop the issue from returning. Please share in the comments which age decade you are currently in, whether you're 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s. This information helps shape future content, as the specific nerve changes detailed here develop differently across age groups, and the relative importance of each preventative step shifts depending on your stage of life. The core takeaway is that a nocturnal leg spasm is not a material shortage that can be fixed by consuming a specific food or beverage. It is an electrical circuit that becomes latched in the dark. You now know exactly how to trigger the physical reset switch using your own hands within 30 seconds. This changes your entire relationship with an early morning episode. You no longer have to stand helpless on a cold floor waiting for the pain to pass. You possess the mechanical tool, understand the physiology, and control the habits needed for quiet nights.